Hello guys, this is NJ from the MBTI tier lists. Welcome to yet another mother of a tier lists. In today's episode, we're going to be contemplating on the question of which would make for the best programmer out of all of the MBTI personality types. Now, to determine that, first we would have to determine which functions would be the greatest for being a programmer. And let's start with the feeling functions. I mean, you just don't do anything with these functions. It's a purely intellectual and technical scientific pursuit and task. You might be at the office or something, you might have to interact with some customers or something every now and then, but the actual task of programming has literally nothing to do with the feeling functions. They're not C tier, they are D tier. Okay, they're completely irrelevant and useless. Okay, so what does programming require the most? It's basically brains, you know. It's a purely intellectual activity. It is a purely abstract activity. Okay, there is some executional element to it. You are executing stuff and so on. So I didn't you derive some benefit from TE, SE, and SI. These functions give you better executional capabilities. But programming, I mean, that's basically if engineering is you're taking some law or formula of physics and use it to, applying it to cause an effect in reality. Programming, that's in programming, it's almost like you come up with your own laws. You have to do it within the kind of limitations of the programming language, but there's a much more room for creativity in programming. You're basically conjuring things out of thin air, and you're constructing laws and principles, and you are producing abstract logical and mathematical entities. So that there is an aspect of creativity. It is not simply a logical and mechanical thing to do. Engineering, for example, that's more logic than creativity. Programming, you could argue that it's almost more creativity than logic and mechanics. Yeah, probably depending on the task at hand and everything, and probably there's probably a lot of menial labor programming where it's you're just doing the stuff and so on. But at the highest level, when you're starting something from scratch like that, there's a big element of creativity. So with programming, it's not that you need just brains alone. If these are the brain's functions, the intuitive functions and TI basically, you also need creativity. So I actually think the intuitive functions are the best functions for programming because they not only give you the brains to figure out everything and understand a programming language and understand the mechanics of programming and so on, but they also give you that creative edge, that you can conjure stuff out of thin air with just the power of your minds. So I TI is an insanely good function for programming. It is 10,000 million times better than TE. I like TE, TE can probably, pull off and figure out the vast majority of programming, endeavors and execute some feasible, programming to get the job done and so on. But it's almost TE is kind of the working man of programming, and TI is kind of the guy with a PhD in engineering in that field. So like TI gives you insane, like programming in some ways is like outside of the creative element that it has, programming is almost like purely like a TI thing to do. That you're creating these like logical systems, you're tweaking them. Like TI has this like a tweaking quality to it, where it likes to build systems that are based on logical mechanics and then like fine tune and tweak those systems based on logic and erase the logical inconsistencies and make the system work better. And so as like TI is an insanely powerful function for programming. Now that being said, I do think that the intuitive functions are stronger, which would be better, NI or NE. I don't think that you can make a good distinction here. Maybe once again, maybe NE is a little bit too hazardous or something, but then again, like NE is way quicker, NI is super deep, and big picture and so on. So I don't know, they both have like, their strengths and so on. I like they're both like at the same level as a function, like overall. And so on. Like with NI and NE, you can like figure out any principle and come up with like solutions for like programming problems and just like understand the whole language and so on. So like yeah, okay. I like intuitives definitely have like a super strong edge when it comes to programming. And the thing about programming is that is like a purely abstract thing. There is some executional element to programming, but it's like 90% like pure abstraction, and the intuitive functions are pure abstract functions. So this kind of like the domain like of these functions. Like TI is also like a really abstract function. Like it kind of like doesn't like directly deal with physical reality anyway whatsoever. So once again, like I would like to compare it to engineering, and it's like engineering is much more like that. It's like an executional science. Like you have to like apply and execute. In programming, like yeah, you do have to execute like commands and produce. Like working, codes, but the code is so long and there's so much text that at the end of the day, like yeah, like you're executing some basic commands like on the line, and then you do it like 1,000 times, and what you're left with is this like a fucking 10,000 pages of like programming codes, and then you have to like analyze and tweak it. And so on. So yeah, like TE is way better in executing stuff than TI. SE is also pretty good at like making sure that the execution is feasible. It doesn't like really have brains or anything, but SE and SI makes you more meticulous in what you're doing. And so on. If you just give like SE and SI some like brains or something, I mean these two functions will just make sure that like you don't make any mistakes and so on. Now that being said, like T is like way better than these functions. Like I like you get something out of like the sensing functions. They do make you more meticulous and observant, and so on. They do like cut your mistakes down a great deal. But TE does it, I think, like better because it has some brains and it has some like problem solving capability at the same time. And TE is like the function that always does a good job. So yeah, this would be like this would be about like the tier list for the functions, like if they were like standalone functions, so on. So the real magics are happening when you start combining these functions. So let us get into it, guys. Okay, so here we have the types. So let us begin with the NFs. Let us begin with the ENFJ. So like leading with FE, a completely and utterly useless function for programming. Secondary NI, okay, that is some of the most powerful functions for programming. Tertiary SE, okay, maybe you can execute like a little bit better without making as much mistakes, you know. But in inferior introverted thinking, like I always say that, like, you know, I used to date an ENFJ, I used to live with an ENFJ, and she was like a bright lady. But when it came to like logical complexities, like she would sometimes be at a loss. ENFJs are like a curious beast because they do have like that secondary NI, which basically enables them to understand pretty much anything. But they can sometimes just get like a little bit confused when it comes to like logic. And you know, like programming, I mean, that is just like probably like 40% or something. It's like tweaking the codes that you have written yourself like yesterday. And that's like a lot of texts. That is like, you know, like 30 pages of nothing but logical code, which is like, you know, code is essentially TI. Like if you would ever put TI into a written form, it would be basically either mathematics or codes. And just like going through this insane quantity of code as an ENFJ and just like, you know, like having all of those logical variables in your head at the same time and figuring out the logic and so on. This is simply like not the forte of an ENFJ. You know, now that being said, that like secondary NI, you know, it is mostly in the servitude of FE, but like I like ENFJs can use it like as a standalone function as well. You know, that would basically enable the ENFJ to understand like pretty much anything and even figure out the, you know, programming and, you know, produce some like creative ways of, you know, solving programming problems and so on. So I like ENFJs would be basically like a B tier programmer. Like the B tier is like, you know, the guy who gets the job done, you know, can do a feasible job, but like kind of like has no like strong talent for it or anything. And like an ENFJ could be like a programmer among others. So what about the ENFP? So ENFPs, I mean, like they are leading with NE, which is arguably one of the best functions for being a programmer. You know, their secondary FI, it's like you don't get like anything out of it. Tertiary TE enables ENFPs to execute stuff more proficiently and so on. You know, like ENFPs, I like they would actually be relatively talented as programmers. The only problem with ENFPs is that they actually have like a polar TI, which means that like they are completely oblivious to, you know, like introverted thinking. Like ENFPs can sometimes get a little bit confused with like complex logical stuff, which programming is literally what it is. That being said, the NE does compensate. And you know, like ENFPs, they would definitely have just like raw talent for being programmers. You know, like it is literally kind of like the mathematical, you know, science closest to NE. You know, I like it's a pure abstract thing. It requires creativity. It requires you to be able to solve problems creatively. Like NE is simply such a good function for it that like I like ENFP should actually make for like an S tier programmer. Maybe they couldn't compete with the greatest of the great, but they would just have to be at the S tier with the main NE alone. And that NE-TE combo, I mean, that is an insanely effective combo for like programming because you basically have all of the powers of intuition and creativity and figuring out puzzles and problems and everything, which is all that the NE does. But then you also have that like executional, let's just like, you know, do this, you know, like let's just like execute this command here and do this on a sequence. And so on. So I like the NE-TE combo is so powerful that the, you know, ENFPs would have to be at the S tier. So what about the INFJ? You know, once again, like leading with NI, you know, like arguably one of the most powerful functions for, you know, programming. Secondary FE, you don't do fuck with that shit. 30 Ti, oh my god. Like, to be honest, like, I'm not entirely sure if there's a juicier combo, for example, for like mathematics than Ni plus Ti. You know, okay, it would be their tertiary function. They would have to develop it, but if you would just keep on doing programming, you would just be developing your Ti the whole time. You know, INFJs, they basically lack like an executional function. They have like an inferior SE, and what an INFJ has like is a polar TE. So INFJs are actually the worst at executing stuff like in the entire system, especially when it comes to physical stuff. Now that being said, like programming, it is so abstract. Like programming is a purely abstract craft. And the NI-TI combo is literally the most abstract combo in the entire system. And because of like most like programming is so much like editing the codes that like NI and TI would be arguably some of the best combos of like editing your own codes and keeping the whole thing in your hands. You know, 100 pages of codes, and you could just like the NI-TI is like arguably the biggest brains combo in the entire system. You know, NI is the deepest brains and TI is the most like complex brains going on, like complex logic going on. You know, like I like the like programming would like be literally the domain of an INFJ. Now, okay, like once again they do have that secondary FE and so on. Maybe they couldn't be the greatest, but I like these guys. I mean, like they would be the feelers, you know, the rare feelers who would just be the gods of programming, basically. Like if they got into it, and so on. That like main intuitive function is just like simply like so unimaginably powerful as a function for being a programmer. And NITI, like programming is kind of like the one like mathematical field of science that where the like weakness of the INFJ of being so poor as an executioner of stuff wouldn't really matter that much. Like INFJs, like as engineers, for example, you know, they would do pretty well and so on, but there is more of an executional aspect to engineering. Like with programming, you're just like tweaking the logical, you know, constructs. And it's like you're making logical constructs out of thin air. Like, man, like NITI would just be a super feasible combo for that shit. Who would be better? It would be practically impossible to determine who would be better between the ENFP and the INFJ. I like ENFPs would be better at just like quickly doing some like programming stuff and figuring out things fast. INFJs would be better. Like, it's a stupid thing, but like INFPs would be almost like more powerful the more demanding the programming endeavor would be. I like NI is better at solving bigger problems. NE is like the quick brains function. So like depending on the requirements, like, you know, but it would be a tight battle anyways. You know, and so on. So let's leave it at this. So what about the INFP? Leading with FI, once again, like you don't do shit with your FI, man. You know, secondary NE, okay, man, like I have to say, man, like I like ENFPs have some surprising level brains, guys. You know, like tertiary SI would, you know, give them some capacity in like tweaking the, you know, NE produced codes. And be like a little bit like, you know, like INFPs, they're introverts. They would have no problem in sitting down and tweaking a code for 10 hours straight. You know, in inferior TE, they're kind of bad at executing. And I like with the case of the INFPs, like that inferior TE kind of like comes to play where like, okay, you know, you can probably figure it out. But, you know, like you do have to produce like lines of commands. And so on. I like INFPs would just like, you know, struggle a little bit, but that NE, man, it is so powerful. And once you got the code done, I like the NE-SI combo would be super brilliant for like actually like editing the code afterwards. So I like INFPs would be some of the greatest like editors of the codes, like among like the INFJ and so on. They are introverts, you know, so like it would be like an introverted pursuit. It would like fit like how their energies work. You know, INFPs do like to sit down and think around stuff, just like, you know, they write novels and so on. That's like endless tinkering with texts. Programming is not that different from, you know, writing a novel, to be honest. I actually think like INFPs would be better than the ENFJs. You know, like, and I actually think that, like, you know, if you had like one intuitive function, like among feeling functions and so on, like I like actually like NE might actually be better like in this circumstance. It has quicker brains, it can figure out complexities better than NI. You know, I like, for the sake of programming, like the NE of the INFP would be stronger for the purpose than the NI of the ENFJ. And being introverts, you know, like you know, just working on that code, man. Like I like INFPs would actually be like an A-tier programmer. Yeah, they might be stressed every now and then. Like as a matter of fact, like I'm not sure if they would. You know, like once again, like programming is a purely abstract thing to do, and INFPs are hyper abstract. You know, like ENFJs want to go to place and do stuff, and the tertiary SEs just want some action. Like INFPs are so okay with just tinkering on a text. Yeah, that inferior TE, it's like, I think that the INFP could figure it out. I think that they would even have like talent for it, but they would have like a slight weakness for it. So they could be like S tier. Yeah, I like if INFPs got into programming and putting the effort into it. Like I like they would actually be like a talented programmer. The A tier is like, you got talent for these shits. So yeah, I like an INFP with like an A tier programmer. So let's look at the, let's see, who do we have next? Let's go for the STs next, okay? ESTPs. SETI, like leading with SE, like you know, like you do get something out of SE for programming for sure. Like just like, you know, going through the data, you know, and consuming a lot of like, you know, programming stuff with SE, like, yeah, that you get something out of it. And like, you know, SE people are just like better at executing, you know, the commands and the programming and so on. That secondary TI, I mean, that is one of the best functions for being a programmer. It just gives you the programming brains. So I like ESTPs would like definitely like understand programming and be able to do it at the high level. I like that SETI combo is simply so much more scientific as a combo than like, you know, FENI or FENE or FENI and so on. You know, like ESTPs, they are mechanics. They are like, you know, ESTPs make for great engineers. You know, anything like logic, anything that is based on logical mechanics, and the ESTP can do it and figure it out and so on. ESTPs have an inferior introverted intuition, so they are not necessarily like, they're some of the most open-minded people, and like willing to explore all kinds of stuff and so on. But at the end of the day, that like, you know, intuitive creativity, the ESTPs somehow like a little bit lack that. And so on. Like in the outside world, like I like ESTPs are so open-minded and so on that they don't like seem like they wouldn't be creative people, but with something like purely abstract like programming, I that the ESTP simply wouldn't be the greatest in coming up with like creative, you know, solutions and creative constructs. Now that being said, SETI, it is some of the most powerful functions for like tinkering any like logical construct and producing them and understanding them. And I like ESTPs would be an A-tier programmer. I think they would probably be even better than the INFP. You know, they just have that like science, that like SETI is the science combo, man. There's no way around it. I like ESTPs would make for like talented programmers and so on. I'm just like not sure if they could like compete with the main intuitives and so on, but I think they would be like talented programmers. Yeah, so what about the ISTJ? I have said it like 1,000 times already on this channel that like ISTJs, they're like the one type that has no brains function. They have like an inferior NE. Their thinking function is TE, which is the most like linear, simple-minded, thinking function. But ISTJs is the one type in the system that has no brains functions, that has brains. ISTJs some like weirdly are always or many times the most intelligent people, and like all manner of science just like agrees with the brain of an ISTJ. ISTJs are so meticulous, and they know everything about everything. They memorize everything, so it's like ISTJs have this like weird way of figuring things out without having an actual brain's function. I like ISTJs would be pretty talented, programmers. Yeah, once again, that like inferior, intuitive function, at some highest and most creativity demanding, activities as a programmer would probably be their Achilles heel in the end. But for the most part, I like ISTJs would actually be talented programmers. And being introverts, like ISTJs also, they have no problem in just like sitting in front of like 1,000 pages of coding texts and just like tweaking that endlessly, 12 hours a day for 10 years straight. Like ISTJs, like you just like get a lot from being an introvert and so on. And ISTJs, they make for great mechanics, great engineers, they are just like good in all forms of science. I like ISTJs would make for totally feasible and even talented programmers. Now the question is like, who would be better? Either the ISTJ with that introverted focus and spending more time on the matter and not having a personal life and so on, would probably usually topple the ESTP, who would just be doing things offhand and just getting the job done and moving on and so on. I like ISTJs would just produce like more like meticulous and carefully calculated code or something. If the ESTPs put in like a lot of effort and so on, maybe they could even top the ISTJ or something. But for the most part, like the ISTJ would be slightly, they would be at the same level. But once again, like hard to determine who would be better, but yeah, let's leave it like this. So what about the ESTJ? Leading with TE, like with TE, like you can basically execute most of the programming. Like TE has just enough brains to figure out like most of the most of the like basic programming command lines that you're gonna be writing down and so on. It is a mechanical function. TE fixes and solves like simple logical problems. So it would be like TE would actually be like a really feasible overall function for basic programming tasks. And the SI secondary makes sure that like the ESTJ never makes a mistake. They're super careful and meticulous, just like the ISTJ, maybe not as much. That tertiary NE would give them like a little bit of a creative streak, like it would just like, give them that like extra, brains. But as a tertiary function, it wouldn't be that strong, but I think it would be just like enough to just like throw the ESTJ to the A tier with these guys. Like ESTJs, they would have to like really like develop the NE, like a lot. It would be like the function that would solve the more complex problems and the function that would come up with like the kind of like abstract creative constructs that you have to produce as a programmer and so on. I like ESTJs would even have some talent for being a programmer. That being said, it is a purely abstract function, and TE and SI are both like super like reality focused functions, and ESTJs do way better as like mechanics of physical stuff than something purely abstract like programming. That being said, they have their shit together so hard, they're so good at like executing stuff, and that tertiary NE just gives them a little bit of brains for it. So I like ESTJs, which just like be relatively talented as programmers. Like if you're like an ESTJ, want to get into programming, I think that you would just be brilliant as a programmer. Just go for it. ESTJ spending the whole day just executing like, stuff, they could do it. Like, going through this like a fucking 10,000 pages of codes, like, might be like a little bit frustrating for the ESTJ. I'm not sure if it would be. But that lack of like TI and only tertiary NE, it's like, yeah, either they could do it, either they could definitely do it. They could go to the text and just like see where the faults are and fix it and so on. Either like in programming, there wouldn't be any that the ESTJ couldn't do. They kind of like have like almost like enough of everything that they could just do a feasible job and be really like, competent about it. Either the ESTJ would have done it for it. It's like A tier. So what about the ISTP? Leading with TI. Funny thing of all of the like, thinking types that are like STs, like ISTPs are actually like the only type that like leads with one of the best functions for programming, which is the introverted thinking. Now, this function alone should throw the ISTPs just like above like all of these guys. Basically, like the fact like you're just leading with TI, it is such like an unimaginably powerful function for programming. It would definitely be the ESTP. Secondary SE, once again, just like makes you better at executing the commands. Like ISTPs can also be kind of meticulous and careful and make no mistakes. ISTPs with the TI-SE combo would just be producing the most like, solid codes like ever. That was like mechanical perfection and logical perfection when it comes to like doing the codes and that like, TI-SE combo would be really good at like, editing the codes. ISTPs, they are introverts once again. They can sit down for 10 hours and go through the same text over and over again. Tertiary NI would just give them that little bit of creativity. ISTPs can be a little bit single-minded with the tertiary NI, but it does give them some like, visionary capabilities of like seeing the underlying nature of something. And kind of like it just gives them like some like extra brains, like the TI-NI combo, once again the most abstract combo, the biggest brains combo in the system. That NI it's almost like a cherry on the top for the ISTPs. I like ISTPs would be super talented as programmers. That like tertiary NI, like once again, like ISTPs might not be the most creative programmer in the system. Like it would be like a slight weakness. Like it's a stupid thing, but like in some ways, even like ESTJs are more creative than the ISTP. That tertiary NE is just like more creative. Like NI in your tertiary position only makes you like tunnel visions. ISTP is going to be sometimes super, incapable of seeing like other options and so on. That being said, that NI, it does help the ISTP zoom in on problems and kind of like figure out where the problem would be by just like thinking about the big picture and so on. And it does give them some like vision for things, some like borderline creative, vision. And so on. I like, there's nowhere where I like the ISTP, which would have to be at the A tier. That TI-NI combo. I mean, it is such an insanely powerful combo for programming that I'd like, I'd say you have to like have the ISTP at the S tier for programming specifically. So what about the NTs? What about the ENTJ? Leading with TE, once again, not the best function, but TE can do like 90% of programming. It's a bit linear, a little bit simple-minded, but it can get the job done, and TE gets a good job done. Now, the secondary TI, oh my god, that is just like a juicy combo. TE-NI combo, NI-TE, I mean, that would just be like one of the most strongest combos for programming. Like, and ENTJs, they have that like secondary NI. So, like, whatever the TE couldn't figure out, the NI would just come in to save the day. ENTJs would have like, and once again, I always say that like ENTJs can like, derive way more out of their NI for the purposes of science and logical stuff than ENFJs. Because for the ENTJ, the NI is serving the TE. So like, for them, it's like the NI is already like focused and pointed at something logical and scientific and so on. Like as an ENFJ, like your NI is mainly, contemplating on things related to human beings and emotions and so on. Like for an ENFJ to use that NI for programming, like it would just be like, well, you can do it as a standalone function, I'm sure, but the ENTJ, the NI would be aligned, for the purpose of programming specifically because of the TE, so it would already be there, and in the hands of an ENTJ, the NI becomes quicker. ENTJs, they would just solve all the most complex and hardest problems with the NI on the go, man. That tertiary SE just makes them even more better at executing stuff. ENTJs would be super talented as programmers. They would just be like, that NI is so powerful, it can see the underlying nature of everything, it can fix the problems, it has like creative solutions for things. NI is arguably the best function in creating abstract concepts and constructs out of thin air, and the TE would make that concept be based on pure and executable logic. ENTJs would be like an unquestionable S-tier programmer. Either they would be even better than the ISTP. Like ENTJs, because they are NTs, that is the best temperament for, being a programmer. Like ENFPs, they have a secondary FI. ENTJs, once again, they have nothing in their functional stacking that would go against programming. Like I always say, like ISTPs and ENTJs, they are like, and INTPs, they are like their functional stacking is pure science. It is pure logic. It is pure mechanical stuff. There's nothing extra in the functional stacking of an ENTJ. The inferior FI, it's a completely useless function for programming. Every single function that the ENTJ has and uses gives you something for programming. TESE, maybe they're not the best functions for programming, but there's nothing else to an ENTJ except a logical mind. They would be a definite S-tier type, even above the INFJs in my view, because INFJs, they do have to skip that FE, and ENTJs, they would be arguably the greatest like executioners of programming. That TESE combo, NI fixing and figuring out the problems and the solutions and producing the vision and everything. ENTJs would be like a hyper talented programmer. Now, what about the INTJ? Now, could the ENTJ compete with an INTJ? Like, I don't know. INTJs, they lead with NI, which is arguably one of the most powerful functions for being a programmer, and the thing is like NI, it's big picture and everything, but like it's almost like the TE makes that NI just even more powerful. I like, NI with TE is way stronger than TI or NE. Like the TE just makes that NI become like a scientific genius that can fix, not only like understand everything, produce complex concepts and constructs and solutions, and be creative in their ways and have vision and everything, but the TE just makes that all, it takes the NI vision and insight and turns it into something concrete, and in the realm of programming, that like abstract creativity, that like deep understanding of the nature of everything, like that would be like the most powerful thing to do. Being a programmer and doing code, that is a purely abstract thing, and INTJs are super abstract, and then the TE can like, turn it into something executable and so on. I like INTJs would be like the unquestionable super genius of programming. There's just no way around it. These guys were born to do it, and they're introverts. Like they have such a juicy thing going on. INTJs can sit down for days, weeks, months, even years, even decades, just to contemplate on a greater question, fixing all the problems, figuring out all the stuff. And it's like INTJs would not only be able to be the best programmers of doing codes, they would be the greatest visionaries on what the fuck you're supposed to do with that code and why. Okay, INTJs would be the perfect package, and that's like the NITE that is super powerful as a combo, especially when you're starting with the NI. There's just no way around it. So what about the INTP? Leading with TI, once again, some of the most powerful functions for programming, specifically like NE secondary. You know, like if NI, like if TE makes the NI more powerful than NE or TI, like NE and TI combo, I mean, those are the two brain functions. Like, because TE is not like really a brain's function. INTP's got like NE and TI, which is like a double brains going on. You know, that there is no more complex combination of understanding complex mechanics and variables and everything. It's like NE and TI because they're both capable of understanding complexities of everything. You know, so like INTPs, I mean, of course, they would just be like the penultimate S tier programmer. Now, the third tier SI just like makes the INTP able to zoom in and make no mistakes. INTPs would be arguably the best, type in doing the editing of a codes. The TI is the best editor of codes. NE sees all the patterns and figures out all of the stuff. And SI, as a third tier function, enables them to zoom in on stuff. INTPs have the penultimate perfect functional stacking for programming, which has like nothing to it except programming at the highest level. INTJs have third tier FI. ENTJs are leading with TE, which is not that powerful. INTPs are leading with two of the most powerful functions for programming, and their third tier SI only like lets them execute everything more meticulously and zoom in on stuff. So like, oh my God, like INTPs, they are like literal perfection when it comes to programming. Nothing would come even close to this is like a fucking like an unimaginable functional stacking for programming. It's almost like God just asked the question like, how the fuck would you do it? And they produce the INTP, man. I like INTJs. They make for better engineers than INTPs. But I like the super hyper complex nature of programming and coding and be like doing mathematics while also doing programming and dealing with these like endless pages of complex mechanic and so on. I like the NITI combo. It's like a 1 millimeter maybe better than the NITE combo. For programming. I like if an INTJ would make for the best engineer, I would have to say I like the INTP would probably make for the best programmer. That being said, if there is any difference between these two maniacs, it would be like a fucking half of a millimeter. INTJs are just like unquestionably the greatest. The whole question of which would be better, an INTP or INTJ, that is just like up for grabs. It's debatable and so on. I like INTJs. Like I like to think that like INTJs would be better engineers and INTPs better programmers. Just like a little bit, because like NITE, like it is better in taking singular formulas and executing that stuff. And NETI is kind of like better for the just an insane level of logical complexity that programming entails. So yeah, but this is like a complete like impossible task to figure out who is better, INTP or INTJ. Now INTJ was ranked number 1 at the engineer list, so let's give it to the ENTP for a change. Okay, I mean these are the two guys, and it'd be impossible who's better at what when it comes to these kind of things. Let's give it to the INTPs this time, okay, guys, as a compromise. So what about the ENTP? You know, like ENTPs, they have that like magical NETI combo going on, just like the INTPs. The problem is that the ENTPs have a tertiary FE, so they don't have that like tertiary SI function to let them like zoom in on stuff. That being said, I mean, if ENFPs are at the S tier, I mean, the ENTPs have to be at the S tier. There's no way around it. You know, ENTPs have to be at the very least as good as like ENFPs, and of course they are even better. Their secondary function is like a thinking function. Their NE is already wired naturally to logical questions. You know, they don't have a tertiary function for that shit, and they are extroverts. So it takes a few points off of them, but I mean, it's like being NTs, like, I mean, they just have to be better than all of the NFs, for example. And the NETI combo, I mean, come on, man, it is just like so much better than like TENI, especially if like the TE is first, because TE is like so much worse than NE or TI. So ENTPs are beating the ENTJ's TE with both of their main functions. So of course ENTPs are better than ENTJs. I'm sorry to say, man. I'm sorry to fucking say. You know, but this is one of the rare, this is one of the like specialties and professions and things to do where like the ENTP simply has more brains than the ENTJ. And programming in its nature, because that's like more editing than execution, you know, you can edit it later on and so on. So it's like ENTPs have no executional function per se, but the NETI is super powerful as a combo for like sitting down and like editing codes. Which is why I like, this is one of those like, you know, scientific things that will like suit the ENTP the best. You know, because this is like, you know, like ENTPs also kind of like have no weakness for this shit, basically. The style of the mental gymnastics that you have to do with when you do anything when it comes to programming, it's all that like NETI does naturally. You know, figuring out problems, you know, figuring out solutions, coming up with like creative, you know, ways of solving problems, producing abstract logical concepts and constructs out of thin air, and then playing with them, editing them, you know, checking the logical consistencies. This is all like NE and TI, man. So, like, you know, if there was like an S plus tier, I mean, it would be basically INTP, INTJ, and ENTP. Like, these are the three NTs that simply have the most powerful 2 or 3 first, you know, functions. There's like a little, there's a small gap between starting from the ENTJ, you know, because that TE main function, like when you start getting to the most complex, highest level programming things, like, you know, the TE main, ENTJs make, I like ENTJs make for better engineers than the ENTPs, because that's like that the NITE is so powerful for like you're looking at the like a formula of physics and then applying, executing with TE. But in the programming realm, it's more like, no, you're doing all kinds of stuff and figuring out problems and coming up with shit from thin air and using creativity, and it gets super complex, you know, in the long run. And so on. ENTP is like, this is like programming is the point where like you just like have to start like noticing that the ENTJ just like doesn't have those like mega brains like these 3 guys do. All of these 3 guys have like the mega brains. ENTJs, they have insane fucking brains. Like they're like the bigger brains than anybody else in the system. You know, but these brainiac guys, you know, I always say like ENTJs are the closest ST from the NTs. You know, like ENTJs, they're almost like, I mean, they are NTs, but they're somehow like midway through NTs. They're not like the pure NT guy, like these 3 guys. Because they are not leading with a brain's function. Like all of these 3 guys are leading with the heaviest brain function of the system in their own right. The ENTJ simply leads with a function that for pure abstract, super complex science is not the most feasible. Extroverted thinking, it is too linear, too straightforward. So the ENTP, this is one of those places where the ENTP simply takes the prize over ENTJ. There's just no way around it. Yeah. So what about the SFs? What about the ESFJ? So ESFJ is leading with FE, secondary SI, like, okay, maybe you could do a careful job when you actually like figure it out and so on. Tertiary NE, like ESFJs, like their tertiary function is the function that starts maybe figuring things out. ESFJs have an inferior TI. Like I have met a high-level ESFJ who was actually a computer scientist. And it's the stupid thing because the guy had like a high IQ, but he would get confused about logical problems every now and then. That like inferior TI with the ENFJ and ESFJ, that is just like a really bad thing to have as a programmer. I'm just like sorry to say, and unlike ENFJs who have that secondary NI going on, ESFJs, you just basically don't have nothing, for you to do programming. Like I'm so sorry, man. Like if an ESFJ ever came to me and asked me like, hey, I want to be a programmer, I would be like, don't do it. Just fucking, bro, like don't fucking do that shit. Like I'm really sorry to say this, but it has to be said, programming is the literal antithesis of an ESFJ. They are like, living in the real world. Programming is happening in the abstract realms. Like you have to use logic and come up with like logical frameworks out of scratch. It's not even that like, you are like analyzing something that is already there. It's like you're coming up with that shit as you go. Like creating logic. Maybe with the NE and ESFJ could understand some like code that is already there, but coming up with that shit, like producing TI out of thin air as an abstract concept and construct, like I'm so sorry, man, and it's like the inferior TI simply, is a bad thing. Okay, ESFJs, like this is the only type where I would go like, just like I'm not sure if you should do it, man. Okay, I'm sorry to say, in most of the cases, most of the types can do most of the things, and I'm sure like an ESFJ, like a high IQ ESFJ, I'm sure they could like do it, get the job done or something. But I wouldn't recommend that shit. Okay, what about the ISFJ? SI main, FE secondary, you don't do shit with either one of these functions for programming per se. Tertiary TI, okay. Inferior NE, well, I do like the SI-TI combo is actually like interestingly like a semi okay way of doing programming. I mean, like TI, like I really like if you wanted to choose a tertiary function for programming, I would take TI over anything, basically. And that SI, it does make the ISFJ pay attention to details, be able to go through all the data and be like really like, detail oriented and so on. And it's like memorize everything, and then the tertiary TI comes in to like figure out some logical stuff. I like as a programmer like SI-TI combo, ISFJs. They would have to like really develop the TI and so on. I like an ISFJ would be able to get the job done. I thought they would be able to just like do it. I thought they would be like a B tier guy. I don't know. Maybe they would be like C tier, But I don't know. Like, most of the programming is probably like not some like super genius shit. Like I like ISFJs could get like the basic programming shit done. And if they had high IQs, I mean, they could do the whole thing and so on. Yeah, like the question of like it's C tier or B tier, hard to say. But I like that tertiary TI gives them some like capacity for understanding like complex logical stuff, Yeah, I would have to put them to the B tier. I like ISFJs would be really good at like editing the stuff, just like going through the code and fixing all the logical inconsistencies and mistakes, and like producing feasible enough, like legitimate enough codes that it would just like, like function and do the job. Okay, so what about the ESFPs? ESFPs, leading with SE, secondary FI, don't shit with that shit, like tertiary TE, yeah, they can execute, yeah, they can kind of like, ESFPs are like surprisingly mechanically gifted and like surprisingly good at like solving these basic logical problems and executing proficiently and so on. That SETE combo, inferior NI, that is like a bit problematic for programming, like for producing like abstract concepts and constructs out of thin air and, understanding the big picture and everything. But I like the SETE combo, which is like, it would be like a relatively okay combo of just like doing the basic programming and so on. Of course, once again, if you have like a super high IQ, like I once used to know like ESFP that actually had like a super high IQ, and this guy was like an academic genius, like he was like a biologist or something. So I do it like once again, like, like if you have like a super high IQ, I mean, of course, you can overcome the fact that you don't have the fucking ideal functional stacking for that shit with IQ alone. But even if the like even without like some super high IQ, I like the ESFP could just like do most of the programming tasks anyways with the SETE. I that they could do it. So I don't think they would be like D tier per se. I that they could kind of do it. So what about the ISFP? I think it's the same, kind of like the same thing, like the tertiary NI. I mean, it's a bit of a simple-minded function. Like as a tertiary function, it's like single-minded. It's like tunnel visions. They would have to like, ISFPs would have to go like to the base with their tertiary NI. I like, it would be more powerful in understanding stuff than a tertiary SNE on an extrovert. ISFPs, they are introverts. ISFPs can spend a lot of time in their heads just contemplating on stuff and so on. So I like the NI of an ISFP is more powerful as a brain's function than the NE of an ESFJ, simply because of the contemplational nature of ISFPs, that they can actually mull over problems. They can just like, spend 10 like 3 hours just thinking about something with their NI and wondering about it and figuring it out and so on. I like ISFPs would also be like a C tier guy, and that they could get the job done. And of course, once again, super high IQ, they could do anything and so on. But with the SENI, I think that if they just thought about it for long enough and so on, they could do it. And that SE also would give them like capability of like being careful and everything. So I like ISFPs would also be like a C tier programmer. So yeah, this is pretty much the list that I would do. Yeah, I like all of these A tier guys would be talented. The S tier could be divided to 2 different categories. There could be like an S plus tier where you got like INTPs, INTJs, and ENTPs. And then the ENTJs and these guys would be like on the S tier. But I like all of these guys like deserve the S tier. They all just like have like genius level minds and functional stackings for this purpose alone. It's a purely abstract thing to do. It's a purely scientific thing to do. And the intuitive functions are just like so ultra powerful for this purpose. Yeah, this is what I would say. So yeah, that's the video, guys, and see you in the next one. Okay, bye-bye.